Hi, you're listening to After Dinner Conversations, short stories for long discussions. What that means is we get short stories, we select those short stories, and then we discuss them specifically about the ethics and the morality of the choices the characters and the situations put us in. Why did you do this? What makes you do this? What makes us good people? What's the nature of truth, goodness, all of that sort of stuff. And hopefully we're all better, smarter people for it and learn a little bit about why we think the way we think. So thank you for listening. Hi, welcome back once again to After Dinner Conversations, short stories for long discussions where we pick short stories and we talk about them. Yes, I'm going to say it again. I am your co host, Kolby, here with Ashley
Hello.
and Jeremy.
And hello.
Hey, Jeremy. Uh, uh, and we have not a Patreon supporter this week, but we do have a sponsor of sorts.
Ooh.
Yeah. Another podcast that does a similar kind of podcast wanted us to talk about them, and they're super cool. So they are called Of Witches and Women Podcast. It is a her story podcast. You see the her there instead of the his story. Telling the tales of witches and women throughout history and mythology with a twist. So you can check them out and learn about Greek mythology and witches and women throughout history on Apple and Google Podcast, YouTube, Spotify, all those places. And their website is ofwitchesandwomen.com. So there you go.
Thanks for the support.
Yeah, they're super cool. I've actually been listening to them. They're pretty good. I've been enjoying them for sure. Okay, so the story this week is Snitch.
By Charles Williams.
By Charles Williams. Thank you. I kind of forget the names all the times.
Yeah.
So this is a longer story, and it's, again, not a sci-fi story. I feel like we've been doing a pretty good job of balancing them lately. It is about a New Orleans pastor a few years after Katrina, and he's been in the sort of lower areas of New Orleans for a while, specifically in the area that was flooded out really badly, and he is basically trying to get his church regoing and getting some programs for other people regoing.
So it's not just his church. It's the rec center.
Yeah, it's like a whole community thing.
It's a whole like neighborhood aerial type of investment that he's making.
Yes. And so in order to get this done, they're using state or federal funding with the aid of a white sort of developer. I can tell you these people are real. Not the white developer part is real, but the mix of sort of private and public partnership money is real. I'll explain that in a second, how that works. Because this is like a 90% accurate story in my experience on city council. Which is one of the reasons why I really liked it. And so the holdup is that there was a white person that was brutally robbed in the area, and that scared off the banking and the financing. And so the pastor goes and talks to the local gang and basically pays them a $5,000 deposit as well as a promise of $1,000 a month in order to keep the white people safe in our area because it's an all-black neighborhood. He also asks them to sort of tell who the person is that did the beat up or the robbery. They say it was somebody from the next town over. We're not going to tell you who. We're not snitches. That's part of their code. And he understands that because he grew up in that same culture even though he's a pastor now.
This gang, by the way, is called the Justice Seekers.
Yeah, they're related, and they're inspired by Nat Turner, who's a history guy for the U.S. And so he then goes to the developer. The developer comes to him and says, hey, we don't have as much money as we thought we were going to have, so there's not going to be as much money for you related to the development. The pastor then goes to the mayor, who says, yeah, that's correct. You're going to have to cut $500,000 out of what you were going to spend. But it becomes clear in that conversation that there's a lot of sort of graft and bribery going around, that the pastor pays his wife for like speaking engagements around town. That seems kind of shady. Additionally, that the
But
mayor...
that's what she does.
She does work. It's just, it's his wife that he's paying. And then the mayor and the council member also are getting some side money through this project to fund their campaigns, which P.S. are also being run in part by their family members that are each getting $50,000 apiece for their family members. And so the pastor goes home and he thinks about it, and he's basically frustrated that he's had to compromise and compromise and compromise. And so he calls up the feds who previously had done an investigation about corruption and money laundering and whatever else, finds the old business card, and basically he snitches, and it's implied that he sort of is turning in the mayor and everybody because he didn't get what he wanted. And that ends the story with the thing. That's why it's called Snitch, right? In part because the gang members wouldn't snitch, but the pastor would snitch. Okay, so and it's a longer story, but it's longer because it's actually a developed world. It's not just long for the sake of long, which is kind of nice.
But it helps to paint this other side of New Orleans, especially after Katrina, that maybe didn't come into the spotlight, of how, trying to rebuild after a massive hurricane.
Yeah.
All the side projects that got scrapped, and all of the, the housing projects and rezoning and that sort of behind the scenes stuff that happened.
And probably the corruption that happened in the rebuilding, yeah.
Yeah, and there were a lot of interesting details in the story as well, where like he passes by a store that's selling ornamental architectural ornaments from houses, and he's like, I'm sure these are people that are just stealing these off of abandoned houses, these all these architectural ornaments, and now they're just selling them to rich white people in the outlying towns.
But you could see that happening, right? Like that totally...
Absolutely, I've seen that happen.
Somebody being like, buy a genuine part of destroyed New Orleans. Here's a window shutter or something.
Stained glass windows that they're stealing out of houses.
Yeah.
And then reselling them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But there were a lot of nice touches like that in the story that really sort of develop, again, as a longer story, but develop the setting and, the idea of what he's trying to convey about the city at this time.
Yeah. I can say just so sometimes when we do technology ones, one of the things we'll ask you, Jeremy, is, okay, how true is this one? And you're pretty good about telling us like, it's 80% true. This is entirely true. Yeah. It's plausible. I can tell you, having been on city council, this is somebody who runs in these circles who wrote this story. This is not somebody who sort of generically is like, I'm going to write a story about corruption. This is a guy who lives in New Orleans, who has done some deals, or at the very least runs in those circles, because it is super accurate about almost all of it. In my experience at least. Ashley, what did you think of the story in general?
It made me sad.
Oh, yeah, what parts of it made you sad?
One, just the fact that this whole area is hurting really, really bad, and how people take advantage of the situation. It made me sad how much behind the scenes wheeling and dealing is going on. Yeah. It's how much we don't know. And then, as much as you want to like the lead pastor guy, and he does have good intentions, the way that he kind of pushes that, like his agenda ahead of anybody else's, it's like, okay, just because you have good intentions doesn't give you the right to be like, my way or the highway, Joe. Like, I don't know. It was a complicated story to swallow. It was a hard pill to swallow because it's real. And it's potentially real. And it's like, oh, this is the world we live in.
And there are no good guys in the story, like pure good guys, right? They're all kind of like...
They're all fighting. They're all...
Right. They're all doing the best they can and doing the same things they have always done, within this particular system.
It's a dog-eat-dog society.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. What do you think, Jeremy? Did it bother you that there are no sort of good guys in this story? Or I said not good guys, but there are no pure good guys in this story?
No, it didn't bother me in that sense, because it just makes it more real. So I liked it because it gives it a reality, or it makes it feel real, like a real story. This is really happening. I was wondering, how much is this really based on reality of what happens or what has happened in New Orleans? Just because everything felt real. These feel like real people who are making, real decisions.
Yeah. One of the statistics I've heard, maybe not in the United States, but in developing countries, is that for every layer of bureaucracy or every hand that money goes through, you should plan on 5 or 10% of it disappearing. And so, like, if you're sort of donating money to the Red Cross, it then donates money to so and so to so and so, and eventually it gets to like poor people in, Uganda. Like every time somebody touches that money on those layers, plan on 5 or 10% disappearing. And I think that part of it comes through kind of in the story, right? Like the mayor's involved, there's 5%. The pastor's involved, there's 5%. The developer's involved, there's 5%. And so the money gets there, but it doesn't all get there, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But how much of that is grift, and how much of it is really administrative overhead?
Right.
And I know in this story, it's it's what do they call it? They're doing kickbacks,
Yeah.
as part of their things, and that is a corrupt process. As opposed to legitimate, the money he's spending on his wife, she's doing a legitimate task. He's
Sure.
paying her a fair wage for her work.
Yeah.
That is, in theory, it's marketing expenses which
Yeah.
are bringing in more money. That's legitimate administrative overhead and
Yep.
not a corrupt process
Right.
necessarily.
At some level, it's unfair to ask his wife to simply work for free. Like, she is doing work. Shouldn't you get paid for doing work? And probably, given that she's been doing it for 30 years with her husband, probably has some level of expertise in it.
So what's the workaround then? Say you're a married couple and I'm doing work for you, but how do you prevent it from coming off as shady? Can you do that? Or do you just have to say, honey, you have to work for somebody else?
Yeah.
Is there a workaround? I'm really asking.
And-
Have you thought of one? Is there a workaround for family members working? I mean, look at how many businesses have family members that work with them. I mean, how do you...
Trump's kids, they all get paid by the White House for being advisors and stuff.
Do you have to you have separation of church and school? It's like, do we have to have separation from family from work? Like, I'm sorry, just families can't work together?
It's that's one option, but it seems like not a really good option for that either, because what if his wife probably is really qualified for this position, in theory. They've been doing it together for a long time. She's part of the ministry. So I'm arguing in favor of that particular scenario where the mayor's son or cousin or whatever, like he mentioned somewhere in the story, this has happened before, and these people are just getting jobs that, they're not doing anything. They're just collecting a check.
Sure, but also keep in mind that that's an unreliable narrator, right? Like,
right.
He, of course, is biased towards his own wife's doing good work and other people doing bad work or doing no work at all.
Right. Exactly. But again, it's presented in that scenario, or in the scenario that she's doing valid work, and it's certainly realistic that the mayor is putting somebody on his campaign payroll just to get them money, not for them to actually do anything.
So there were a couple of parts of it that, from my own experience, were unrealistic about the story. And the admissions was actually one of the only unrealistic parts about it. When you look at the campaign, when you look at campaign spending, what you'll see is $5,000 paid to Campaigners Plus, LLC, and it'll look totally legit. And then you go to the Corporation Commission's website and look up Campaigners Plus, and it's run by some random person whose name you don't recognize. But then when you do a Google search or a Facebook search, you find that random person whose name you don't recognize is really good friends and partners with that person's husband or wife. And so what you see is happening is the money's going into the campaign, out to an LLC with a vaguely legitimate name, run by the family friend who's then giving that money back to the wife, and the wife is an employee of that company. And that's how it goes through. So the idea that even among friends, like even in a tight-knit group, that they would admit to each other that's what's happening, that doesn't happen in my experience, because you never trust anyone with that secret, with those secrets, because of exactly what happened in this story, right? Like eventually every political ally becomes a political enemy, and you never want to give them enough to sort of deal a death blow. You want to give them just enough to let you know that you're building trust. And so that was one of the only parts. And the only other part of the story I was like is not really realistic, is the fact that you could buy off a gang for $5,000. Like I felt like gangs probably make much better money than that in the drug trade, and $5,000 is just like walking around money to them.
Well, and it was $1,000 a week
Still,
that he was giving them.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like a lot of drug money. I don't know.
Well, maybe
it is.
Maybe it's not a gang of like drug related. It
Yeah.
could be like a gang of a different
true.
type. It doesn't have to be drug related gang.
Yeah, what did you guys think of the fact that the pastor basically snitched them out because he wasn't getting a big enough share of the pie? Like, so it wasn't that he wasn't getting something; it was just a last negotiating chip that he didn't feel like he was getting enough.
Yeah, that's I don't. That's a hard one to parse.
Yeah.
Because, and again, from his narrative perspective, it's not necessary. That is not necessarily the reason. It's a change of heart in some ways, is what he's going through. But it's hard to argue that.
I'd say if he got no money, then go ahead and snitch. But it's the fact that he's like, I didn't get all that I wanted. Boo-hoo on you guys. Now I'm going to tattletale. I was like, you're still getting something. But, I mean, who's to say, desperate times call for desperate measures. And he's like, this is a do-or-die scenario for him.
Sure, but I wondered, like, what happens next? So, like, the feds come in, they break everything up, the project is probably off, or the developer or the mayor gets in trouble. Like, his project still doesn't get built.
Right.
Like, I feel like that was the nuclear option, and I'm not... And he was still going to get some of his stuff, right? Like, he was still going to get some things for the community. And so he basically took some things out of play. Like, he basically picked up his ball and went home.
It made me wonder, whoever the mayor is running against, because he's in a re-election year, maybe now he realizes the mayor that he's been dealing with currently isn't... is kind of backing out of being his partner. Maybe on the flip side, this pastor guy has now made a new deal with his enemy running for mayor.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because it's like, oh, this guy finally, he keeps taking more and more and more. Ooh, I made a side deal with this other guy running against him. I'm going to put my chips on him.
And maybe that would have been the smart move, right? Like, maybe the smart move would have been to go to the other candidate and be like, look, I have this information. I will share it and use it in a way that's helpful to you. But if you're elected, here's what I want, right? Like, I want to get paid. I want my community to get paid.
I feel like either all of his money was taken away or he's made a deal with one of the other candidates running against the mayor. That would have justified him snitching out. Him just deciding to snitch on him doesn't... I feel like it was kind of... not justified in a way. That's a severe measure to take for knowing it's like
it's too much for too little.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know. I think we might be missing an important part of the story here in terms of what made his decision. Because he's looking at what his wife tells him to do. Job suffered far worse, and you must be prepared to stand up for those who have selfish motives. You must stay the course of righteousness with perseverance. Suffering will be part of that, and I fear your suffering is just the beginning. And so then he goes through this thought process of, some other verses specifically, for he will complete what he appoints for me, and many such things are on his mind. And that the answer was simple and required him to do something he'd advised the seekers of justice and others to do, but had never himself chosen to do. So I think he is having a change of heart.
So you think he's okay? So you read it totally different than I did then. I assumed that he was still wheeling and dealing, and you're saying that he maybe realizes that like stop wheeling and dealing and just act from a pure place.
Well, he said
Yes.
he felt suddenly rejuvenated. The answer was simple and required him to do something he'd advised the seekers of justice and others to do,
Yeah.
but had never himself chosen to do. To finally, for him to kind of correct his own ship and be like, I'm
Right.
doing this the right way.
Because the whole story, he's been telling us that he's been doing the same thing the whole time, and that's wheeling and dealing with these people who he does not approve of, these white racists that, are in positions of power.
But
And that, like, you
yeah.
have to do this.
I found him. That didn't even occur to me. But the reason it didn't occur to me, because I think you could be right. I'm kind of surprised. I wish it had occurred to me. I viewed him as a terribly unreliable narrator. Not because he was just lying to us, but that he was lying to himself. Like, if you look at his background, he talked about in the story, or they talked about in the story, that he once was one of those street guys, one of those gangbangers, and that he found God and it got him into the church. And I took it as, and maybe it was my own sort of bias when I read it, I took it as he switched from one gang to another. Right? That there are really three gangs in this story. There's the mayor politician gang, and they've got their own codes and ethics and kickbacks and bribes and stuff. There's the church gang, and they've got their own code and ethics. And there's the gangs gang, but they're all a gang, right? None of them are sort of taking a moral ground. And the way I read it was, while he justifies these things for the common good, it's not the common good he cares about. It's power. It's being in charge. It's, controlling his fiefdom.
But what about his meeting with that other church leader guy who was like, yeah, we really don't believe in God, but we're going to work together. Like, I think that was also one of the final straws for him of being like, I'm steering my ship the wrong way. I need to go back to realigning myself with God and do the right thing. I think, he got to test him with money and he got to test him with power. Now he's testing him on his faith of who he can trust. And finally he was like, nope, I can't just wheel and deal with somebody that I can't trust morally.
Who might not even believe in God.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I think that was also one of the things that maybe was his last straw for him to realign himself to getting back on the quote unquote good guy side, the good moral way of going.
That's interesting.
You guys gave this guy a lot more credit than I did.
I want to believe that he has good intentions. I think he has good intentions. But I think when push comes to shove, I think especially with his wife, who, brings at him all of these Bible verses and is like, listen, your job now, this is what you got to do. It kind of reinvigorated that in him. But initially, you could see him trying to get his way or the highway there. Like, this is where the money needs to go. This is what needs to happen. And those are good things that he wanted to do. But I don't know if his dream was just so big that it seemed scary. I mean, that can be scary for a lot of people. Think this one man is going to control all these pockets of helping, unprivileged youth or whatnot. That can be intimidating to have one person control all of that.
Yeah. Jeremy, what do you think? Did you get the fiefdom theory, or do you think that this guy really had a change of heart here?
I'm a little more inclined to think that
he had to change of heart?
That he had a change of heart, and a lot of it, because there's a lot of evidence in here where he really doesn't like this developer. And
no, he doesn't like the developer. He's
not really
like
fond of the mayor.
Yeah.
And it seems really obvious. This developer has gotten rich working as, doing public works, basically, or doing private public joint ventures. So he's making a lot of money off of this. And I think he's just trying to squeeze these guys out, for more of this money.
Well, plus, wasn't he saying they were going to redevelop one of the lower income areas, like for his own for profit? Am I mistaking that? That was one of the things that he was like, oh, yeah, nope, now it's cheaper or whatever. I can now reclaim this in my own zoning area. I think that was the reclaimed, houses and windows.
So the way it usually works for these things, for what it's worth, is there's sort of two ways buildings get built. One is you just go to a bank and the bank cuts you a check and you build the building based on all the performance. You usually own the land or you used to have an option to buy the land. And you've already got the entitlements done. So you already know what the building looks like. You've already got approval from the city for height, for density, for design. You take that to the bank and the bank goes, yeah, someone had lived there. Those are tougher deals to do when it's bad financing time. However, the other way that you get financing done when no one will finance is there are state or federal agencies. You build that same portfolio. You get the architects to draw up the pretty drawings and get entitlements, and then you take them to the federal government or the state government bureau, and they do they help you. They basically co-sign for a loan, right? So they give you a percentage of the loan, but they also co-sign for it. So then the bank only has to loan you 40% of it, right? And so there's very little risk to the bank because it's not 100% loan to value or 90% loan to value. It's a 40% loan to value because a federal government is basically co-signing and covering the down payment of the loan or however it goes. And so that way you can get financing to do development in areas that traditional banks, because of crime or poverty or whatever, wouldn't normally go through because they're unwilling to take that risk. Now, the way that developers, and they're really complicated to do because there's just a lot more government paperwork. But once you've got a couple of those in place, it starts to help the neighborhood. And if you coincidentally own the land around it, now you can get traditional financing often to do more traditional buildings that have a much higher payout.
I found it in the story where a key ingredient was missing from the public relations campaign, and that was participation and support of local white community.
Yeah.
Because there are reports suggesting that all of Bakup Town be bulldozed and turned into a master planned redeveloped area.
Yeah. Which is code for gentrification, for sure. This is all going to be gentrification. That was the other part that I thought was interesting about this. They don't mention the story, and I understand why they didn't, is he doesn't know it, but he is the cause of gentrification. Like, he's enticing this developer in here. He's developing all of this in, and it will eventually get developed, either by this guy or somebody else, maybe with or without the church. And rents will go up. And all the people that he wants to help in his black neighborhood, they're not going to be black anymore. Like, because a bunch of, like, white yuppies are going to come in and they're going to complain that there's no grocery store, and they're going to add bike lanes and a farmer's market and, and all that stuff. And so it's a little bit odd that, like, fast forward 30 years, he will have put his own congregation out of business, so to speak. He just doesn't know it yet.
Is that why he's self-destructing then?
No, I don't think he's even. I don't think he realizes that's what he's doing. But I mean, this is the beginnings of gentrification. Is when you start bringing in these developers. And I kind of wish that he had smaller eyes in this, or like he wanted to do this big project to look nice. By the way, $24 million is not a big project. It's like 4 to 6 homes, but whatever. 10 homes tops. But I wish he had gone just like house by house and like revitalized and like, had the small loans for people to fix their own homes in order to keep those homes and keep that architecture, keep those people living there, as opposed to sort of this like. Hi, this is Kolby, and you are listening to After Dinner Conversation, short stories for long discussions. But you already knew that, didn't you? If you'd like to support what we do at After Dinner Conversation, head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/After Dinner Conversation. That's right, for as little as $5 a month, you can support thoughtful conversations like the one you're listening to. And as an ad incentive for being a Patreon supporter, you'll get early access to new short stories and ad-free podcasts, meaning you'll never have to listen to this blurb again. At higher levels of support, you'll be able to vote on which short stories become podcast discussions. And you'll even be able to submit questions for us to discuss during these podcasts. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being the kind of person that supports thoughtful discussion. Had the small loans for people to fix their own homes in order to keep those homes and keep that architecture, keep those people living there, as opposed to sort of this like tear it all down, build up like, a bunch of condos for vibrancy or whatever.
I wonder how much he was scared, because he mentioned all the people fled. They left. They went
Yeah.
to other major cities. Like, they're not coming back, or
No,
potentially
probably
not
not.
coming back.
Well, then I don't know if they should, right? Like you live in a place that's below sea level, like
There's
it's
a good
not
point
like,
to that, definitely.
It's not like the buildings that he's building are the last buildings that are going to get wiped away. Like every 30 years now, they're going to get wiped away. Which I thought was also interesting that the white pastor that he worked with was talking about how he really in one more or less said this was global warming that did this, not God. And it's like, global warming is going to do it again. Mm-hmm. Like your area is eventually going to be underwater. I thought that was interesting as well. All right, so I've got a question for you guys. So and feel free to steer the conversation however you want. But this is one of the ones that was in my head I wanted us to talk about. Do you think the pastor was more or less moral than the gang that he interacted with? Because the gang that he interacted with, they had a code, don't snitch, and they followed that code. They didn't snitch. He had a code, don't snitch, and he had this epiphany, and now if you believe him, like he's at he's leveled up. I'm of the opinion that he actually leveled down, that he couldn't even maintain the code of a street gang.
I don't think his code was don't stitch. I think his code was follow God. That was his code. That was his code, because for him, he wasn't disgracing God by making wheeling and dealings, because he was doing the greater good. He was bringing good to the community. Snitching was their code. His code was different. I think he saw himself above those other guys. He respected them. He respected the gang members. But the gang members, they didn't care what they did. They were just pay us, we'll do whatever you want as long as you're paying us.
Or just thugs for hire.
Yeah.
Right.
So their motivation was money. Their code was snitching. For the pastor, his motivation and his code was both God, and whatever he could to satisfy both.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He basically said that he came from the street, and that was his code until he found God. Mm-hmm. And, and this whole story is him not really rising above that. He's still playing the same game that the street gang is. He's
just playing in a different park.
In a different park, and he really has to come back to God and follow this moral code.
You guys gave this guy a lot more credit than I did. You guys were so much nicer. So let me ask a different question then, just from our question. This is question number 2, and I'm rephrasing a little bit. Which do you think comes first? Do you think you get the position and you build the moral code that's defined by that position, or do you think you have that moral code and then it steers you? Like, this goes back to the thing, and I'm going to just be offensive and say this. Like, do people in fraternities, are they jerks and so they join fraternities, or do they join fraternities and so they become jerks? And the same thing, like, does the politician have this moral flexibility and so he becomes a politician, or does he become a politician and then gain this moral flexibility? Like, for each one of those 3 groups.
I think it's a huge social pressure that comes with it. Everyone wants to be included. They want to be part of the group, and so to be part of the group, you got to play by the game.
So you think first you get in the group, and then you adopt their sort of code of ethics?
I think you go in it with good intentions, and from that is the corruption kind of gets to you.
You get inch by inch.
Yes. So Lawrence Lessig wrote a book called America Compromised, and what he talks about in this. What this whole book about is why and how institutions become corrupt. And that's basically the major point of this, is Congress, for a lot of reasons, has become a corrupt institution that then corrupts its members. So,
sure.
Jimmy Stewart can go to Congress and be an awesome guy, but, he's playing a game that's stacked against him. And, so that
So
Right.
it's only a matter
Camping
of time until he's
before-
spending 70% of his
yes.
time raising funds.
Or that if he doesn't, he's voted out the next term because his competitor financed him.
Yeah. And so, it
So
doesn't
I think
even
the instant, yeah,
So you might come in corrupt or you might come in pure, but it hardly matters because if you're going to stay more than one term or for a brief period of time, you're going to have to play the game the way they play it.
Or if you're into
Right.
it and you stick to your moral compass, do not expect to get your ideas passed. Do not expect to be as productive as you want it to be,
Right.
because
And plan on being a one-term gang member.
if you're not willing to pat someone on the back, they're not going to pat you on the back. And that's
Right.
the hard thing to accept. That's the
Yeah.
hard pill to swallow. And so finally you're sick of sitting there and being told no, no, and no. And so finally, like, fine, I'll play the game
So do you guys
because I care and this is the only way it can get done.
So do you think this is true for every sort of group of people? Like, so you join a triathlon group, or you join a whatever, Dungeons and Dragons group, or you join a whatever, and when you join that group, you immediately have to adopt their corruption, right? Like who the in people are, who the out people are, who we like or don't like, how we... I don't know.
No, I think
Or you think it's unique to Congress?
I want to know how it started. So there was an interesting story that I was watching with the whole pandemic going on, and it was an American who's dating or living with or married to a Swedish lady, and they're living in Sweden. And they were talking about, we have a trust in our government that they trust us and we trust them. And that's very unique, especially for government. And so that's why there's not this huge fear coming from the Swedish people. They're like, they told us to social distance. Okay, we're social distancing.
Because they're being
There wasn't
good
this
with us.
mass panic. It's because they were given guidance and they trust
Yeah.
that the government's giving them scientific based information of how to best cope with this. And they don't have reason to question them.
The government's never given them reason to question them either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Wouldn't
so
that
they
be
have
nice?
and so
Wouldn't
yeah,
that be
they
nice?
so yeah, they do have a high death toll, but they've also found that that's majority of in, retirement home centers where people are living in close confines, and that's more of a, hey, now we have to look at this. What are we doing for our elderly? Not necessarily, and not everyone needs to wear a mask, because that's not unique just to Sweden. The elderly population, that's worldwide. So I think that that actually made me go, I want to go to Sweden. Like, I want to see. You see it in other countries too, like the people of like New Zealand. They love their government.
Yeah.
The majority. I'm talking about majorities, not minorities, but they really feel like their government's there to protect them. And somewhere along the line, either another snake got in there and manipulated the system. I don't know where that started.
I've seen polling that the trust level of Congress among American people is like 15 to 18%.
Yeah.
Like it is very low, and it is lower than it has ever been, and it's been like that for 15 or 20 years now. Yeah. So what do you think,
how do you
Jeremy?
correct that? Do you just have to call the FBI on all of them? Wait, the
No.
FBI is part of it. No. Oh.
So what do you think, Jeremy? Do you think that once you sort of get into a group, you have to adopt their sort of...
Yeah, I think there's certainly
corruption?
something to that. Right, there's a whole thing about subcultures specifically,
Yeah.
where you are kind of drawn into that, and there's a lot of infighting and incestuous relationships in that sense.
Sure.
And I think that extends probably to politics in any sort of organization.
So I'm
That
gonna
you do
say-
have to, if to fit in, you have to follow the rules.
So how did you tolerate it? You were not
city
one.
and government?
Yeah. How did you ever bend on your morals? Did you feel inclined to?
Yeah. So I was always of the opinion in city stuff that if you moved the ball forward, nobody cared about your pride. Excuse me. If you moved the ball forward, nobody cared about your pride. So I can give you an example of this. And this was I can give it as an example without bragging because it wasn't my doing. One of our council members wanted to do free preschool for every kid in the city of Tempe that was of preschool age that was whose family was below the poverty line. And the city did a big study about it and found that in order to do that, we would need, I'm getting these numbers wrong, but the approximation, the ratios are correct. We would need like 13 classrooms going full time because there were like, 300 kids that were preschool age at any given time in the city that whose parents couldn't. And there's all these studies about why, it's good. The parent can now go to work so they can both not pay money by getting free pre-K, but they can also go to work. So you raise their standard of living. And so all of these great things happen. And there was no question at all that it was a good thing. And it came down to a 3-3 vote with another council member that was in Vegas partying up with his family. And the council member, so we had to call the council member to break the vote. And he clearly had not read the agenda. He wasn't expecting a phone call. He wasn't expecting to vote on this thing that was really important in my mind. And they called him up on the phone during the meeting and put him on. And they were like, you're our deciding vote. What do you want to do? And he's like, I agree with the committee. And he hangs up the phone. Because you can hear like Vegas going on in the background. And so everyone in council is texting him. We're like, no, dude, you got to be clearer than that. And so he gets on the call again. They call him back. And he goes, well, I just want to do whatever the committee recommended. And it's like, well, the committee didn't have a recommendation. They were split. He's like, well, what's the number that we need? He's like, 13. And one of the other council members like, how do you feel about 9? He goes, yeah, no, that's fine. Good, 9. And then he hangs up the phone again. And so the one way you could look at it is, I can't believe that somebody takes their job so not seriously, that there are a clear good, there's a clear value in this. And we know how much need there is. We need 13 classrooms. We only got 9. So you could look at it from as the way the pastor looks at it, as a failure. Or you could look at it from the standpoint of before we had 0, and now we have 9. And that's a really hard thing to, particularly given that it was such a trivial reason that he didn't participate, right? He just was hanging out in Vegas.
I meant for you, for your own moral. Have you ever had a developer come to you and be like, hey, vote yes on this and you'll get your other thing going?
No, they've never asked me, and I think I've always, I wouldn't even let him pay for a coffee. So I think I sort of exuded that. So when we go meet at a coffee shop, they'd be like, oh, let me get your iced tea. And I'm like, no, it's good. I'm good. And they're like, seriously, an iced tea? And I'm like... Did
you see that happen with other council members? Did you figure that's the game and you morally opted not to play the game?
I don't know how other people interacted because it was so clear the way I was interacting, I wouldn't have even been... I'm just not included in it. So what happens is you're just not in those rooms anymore. You're not invited. It's sort of like it's like the one, and it's not saying that I'm the one clean cop, but as a paradigm, it's like the one clean cop isn't going to get invited into that coffee shop where they're deciding how to divvy up kickbacks from the local merchants.
Do you feel like you missed out then on having more?
I was less effective.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How did that feel? Did that bother you?
No, because at the end of the day, I have to sleep. That's all. I just have to sleep at night. And so, and I took the opinion, and this was maybe a bad opinion, is that my job wasn't to succeed. My job was to prove that I tried. And so 50 strikeouts where you swing at every pitch isn't a failure, because what I think people, and this was my frustration with a lot of presidential politicians as well, is I don't expect everything to work. I don't expect you to get everything you want. Same thing with Obamacare. But I don't expect you to not try.
But you're in that position where you could blow the horn. If you saw the corruptness happening behind, did you ever see that? And did you ever feel the need to blow the horn?
I didn't. I mean, I heard rumors of it. I didn't ever see it. And I certainly didn't have enough to blow the horn on it because I was never invited into those rooms.
Yeah.
I mean, to the point even where
so you never got your hands dirty. You never.
No. And I never got invited into the rooms to even know enough to talk about what's happening. I mean, so and the people that did development, they knew that, right? So they would tell me just in passing, and this is sort of the rumor parts that I would hear. So oh, and I've got another meeting in an hour. I've got to go meet with other council member or mayor or whoever. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. He's like, no, it's really not. I'm like, what? And he's like, well, when I meet with you, you're really clear. You say, I like this. I don't like this. I'll vote for it if you do this. I don't need 100% of what I want. But if I don't get these two things and get 30%, I'm a no vote. And I count votes. And if I need your vote, I'll give you your 30%. If I count votes and I don't need your vote, I won't give you your 30%. And we all sort of know how we stand. He's like, and the impression I got was with other council members, it was, let me tell you, or other people, not even just my city, but in other cities in the Valley. I don't want to pick on my city. It was clear that it was a lot wishy-washier in the negotiations, and there was a lot more. There wasn't like, I need this and I vote yes, or I need this and I vote no, and they're related to the size, the density, the open space, the number of trees. It was a much wishier-washier process. Is the sort of inclination that they were giving me.
And it sounds like what's probably going on is they're being wishy-washy because everybody's trying to get the most they can out of the situation.
Yes.
So you can't be very specific. It's like, well, what can you offer me?
Right. But I got the impression in the sort of passing of developers that it was a different process for me than with other people. Maybe because I was more clear about like this and this, yes. This and this, no. I don't know though. I really don't know. And I was probably less effective for it. I know that there was a politician, I want to get back to the story in a sec, who told me, who was in the House of Representatives, the U.S. House, and he said, look, I knew that I was in a swing state when the Obamacare vote came up. I knew that if I voted for it, I would get elected out of office. I knew it was going to be a close vote. And I knew it was probably the only time in my lifetime that this vote would ever get a chance. And so I decided in that moment to become a one-term congressman and just vote and pass it anyway. And he did vote, and it did pass, and he was a one-term congressman. He did get voted out that very next election. Now, I don't know if his understanding of the situation, like maybe he could have voted the other way, and maybe it didn't matter.
He still would have gotten voted out, right?
Right, but in his mind, that was the moment he decided he wasn't going to get reelected. That voting on this was more important than getting reelected. And I just, in this story, boy, I don't hear any of that. Right? Like nobody sounds like that kind of morality in this story.
So you're not getting that from the pastor in the end of this, that this is the decision that needs to happen. This isn't going to happen this way, so I need to vote my conscience.
I didn't get that, but I very much understand how that is in there and how you guys got that. Mm-hmm. Like, I definitely see, now that you point out the context, I definitely see that context, but I always am weary of the person who, and this is the way I read it, of the person who convinces themselves that, like, I'll be moral next time.
So that was the thing I was going to say, is God enough of a like starship to follow?
I think,
or does it have to come from here? Like, because you could see he once wasn't following God and he was in the gang, and then he righted his ship following the North Star of God, and then here he is playing the game, and then he has to get righted again by God. So is it an internal or is it an external?
I think he's modifying God to meet his own. I think God is his own internal thing going on, and he's modifying God to meet. That's the way I read it.
I saw it as he might have lost sight of it, and then it was his wife coming to him and, again, rereading certain chapters, and him meeting with the other pastor that made him go, wait a second, I gotta see this straight again.
Yeah.
So, but I again, he was relying on this external reminder instead of an internal cue.
Yeah. No, I think you guys could very well be right. I just maybe am less trusting of people of faith. Maybe that's it.
No, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying, like, is that a reliable gold star to go after instead of just being here? Now, it's okay to use those as ideas. It's just we don't. In this context, it seems like that's what he keeps deviating from, and that's where he keeps coming back. It's not like ingrained in him.
And I want to just say something really quickly before I get myself in trouble for what I just said. It's not that I'm in question of the choices of people of faith. It's that I'm in question of the choice of people in general who defer to a third party as a source of morality,
Yes.
when in fact they are the controllers of the morality of that third party, right? So whether you say, I'm doing this because it's God's will, but let me tell you what God's will is, or you're saying, I'm doing this because my parent or my coach or my whatever is telling me, but let me tell you what they really mean. Like anytime you're deferring to a source that you control the interpretation of.
All right, this is going to bring me
I'm
down a
sketched.
whole nother thing. Isn't that the whole job of pastors, to take
that's why I don't trust them.
lines of passage and then it tell you what it means?
Right.
Like
And
that's
this is why I
how
don't-
that fits into your life.
This is why I don't like. I feel like the perfect church would be like, if you believe the Bible is the divine word of God, the perfect church would be like, here is the Bible, go read it. We're gonna come together every week and talk about it. Like
you tell me what you think it is.
You tell me what it means to you.
I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong. We're
Right.
just going to,
If
like
it's
we're
right,
doing
we're gonna-
here.
Right,
Yeah,
like we're doing
exactly. So I think the point, Kolby, the way to say this is you don't
Yeah.
trust people who outsource their critical thinking.
Yeah, I remember it was you or your ex-wife who used to say that. And
Exactly.
and yes, and I think that's absolutely true, right? And that's why I don't know. I was just sketch on the whole thing. Let me look at the questions in case we missed any here. I think we've had a really good discussion
I think
anyway.
we pretty much hit all of them.
Uh,
This was good. We had, instead of being like a parental thing, we had someone who actually had
Yeah.
involvement in government.
so let me just ask. We'll get to one last question here. Based on what we know about the pastor, what do you think becomes of the pastor? Oh, wait a minute. Why do you think? No, it says why do you think he became a pastor? Do you believe in his religious conversion explanation? That he was a gang member who was sort of saved?
I think that's exactly the way we talked about. I think it enlightened him,
Yeah.
and he wanted to be good, and he doesn't know how. So he uses the Bible as a way to align
Right.
himself. It's not internal. He relies on it to help him straighten himself out.
Okay.
Right. And I think it's very much the same thing, that we don't always have a moral compass that works well. And sometimes we need an external source for that compass. And so if you're in a situation that you do know is not good for you, and you come across something that says, this is how you can find salvation from this bad situation you're in, it's easy to move to that next thing. But as we saw, he still, maintained the same attitudes that these gangs did. He still wouldn't snitch and approved of their attitude towards this, and still played this game. And so, it's a longer journey for them, for him. And maybe this is that next step, that what he's finally realizing. He's been preaching this, but never living it.
So I would just like to point something out based on one of our previous podcasts. So this is interesting. So in our other podcast, you guys were the ones who were like, I don't have a soul. I don't believe in God, whatever. And I was like, maybe. Maybe. So I was the religious one. But when it comes to the motivations of the pastor, I'm the one who's like, man, I don't believe anything that guy says. I think he not only is lying to us, I think he's lying to himself. And you guys are the ones who are like, maybe.
When he has that external, his wife reading him the different passages,
Yeah.
it does make him self-reflect. And I'm promoting anything that makes someone self-reflect and
Yeah.
think about their decisions. I'm okay with that. And if you want to use the
Yeah.
Bible to do that, if you want to read old diaries and old mistakes that you used to make,
Yeah.
cool. But you can't fault him for...
I just think it's funny that
Well,
that we flipped anyway. Yeah, no, I agree with you. Whatever you
Right.
get your source, whether you're reading quotes from Winston Churchill, if it provides you a guiding light, go with it.
right. And neither of us, Kolby, are saying that we've changed our minds.
I
We just
know.
understand his motivation.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you just read a little different. You just read it differently than I did, for sure, which is cool. I want to go back and reread it now, actually, and think about. I think I just was really Jeremy. I don't know how familiar. Are you vaguely familiar with the story of Job? Like God propounds a million problems on him, and he to
Yeah,
test him,
it's-
not to. I mean, it's sort of it's a B level sort of. It's not Noah in the Ark, but
Right, and it's frequently used as, here's a description of why God is a huge asshole,
yes,
because
he
he
just tortured somebody to see if
abuses
they would break.
to win a bet. He's
Yeah.
doing it to win a bet.
Yeah.
He,
Yeah, it's Old
So-
Testament God. It's not New Testament God. That's
yeah,
for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. So
And so in my mind, the fact that he kept, and this maybe is what put a negative thing in my mind right from the beginning, is given that he was talking about Job all the time and comparing himself to Job, that put a bad taste in my mouth because it was like God is testing me. It's like, man, God don't care about you. You just need to help your people. Shut up. At any rate. Okay, I'm going to shut up now as well. You have been listening to After Dinner Conversation, short stories for long discussions. Please like and subscribe.
Go to the website.
Mm.
afterdinnerconversations.com.
Yep. And please support us on Patreon at patreon.com/afterdinnerconversation. We send out all sorts of extras, behind-the-scene footage. You get early release versions of everything. Also, our book, Season 2, is out. Please go ahead and buy that. Bye. If you've enjoyed listening to this, please like and subscribe. It helps us out a ton. You know, the vast majority of people listen haven't liked and subscribed, which means maybe it shows up in your algorithm, maybe it doesn't. So don't leave that to chance. Just go ahead and hit that button, and we'd sure appreciate that. And that way we can keep doing what we're doing, and you're not left to the whims of some algorithm. Thanks.